Most people think the biggest mistakes in life happen in a single dramatic moment, a loud argument, a risky investment, a sudden decision that changes everything overnight. But the truth is far more uncomfortable, because the most expensive choices are rarely loud. They are quiet, slow, almost invisible at the time they are made, and by the time their cost becomes clear, the bill has already arrived in the form of lost time, missed opportunities, relationships that slowly faded, careers that never truly started, or futures that quietly slipped away while everything felt safe and normal. There was once a man who believed he was making the responsible choice when he turned down an opportunity that felt uncertain, because stability seemed smarter than risk, and comfort felt wiser than ambition. So he chose the familiar path, the predictable salary, the safe routine, and for years nothing seemed wrong. In fact, everything looked fine from the outside. He paid his bills, he showed up every day, he built a life that appeared stable, but what he didn't see was the hidden cost accumulating silently in the background. Because every year he stayed in the same place was a year someone else moved forward. Every time he said, maybe, later, was a door that quietly closed forever. Every time he chose security over growth, he exchanged possibility for predictability. And predictability has a price that no one calculates at the beginning. The cost of a decision is rarely immediate. It compounds over time like interest, invisible at first, devastating later. And the most dangerous part is that society rewards safe decisions in the short term. You are praised for being realistic, for not taking risks, for staying grounded, for choosing certainty. And those compliments can feel like confirmation that you made the right choice, but what they never tell you is that certainty often costs more than failure, because failure teaches while comfort delays, and delay is the most expensive decision of all. Years passed, and the man began to notice something subtle, a quiet dissatisfaction that didn't have a clear cause. Nothing was technically wrong, yet something felt missing. And that feeling grew every time he saw someone who had taken the risk he once avoided, every time he watched a colleague surpass him, every time he realized that the life he built was not the one he imagined, but the one he settled for. And settlement is not a single decision, it is a habit formed through thousands of small choices that feel harmless in the moment. No one decides to waste a decade. They simply decide to wait, and waiting feels logical when framed as preparation. But preparation without action becomes postponement, and postponement slowly transforms into permanence. The true cost of a decision is not measured in money. It is measured in what could have existed but never did, in the version of yourself that never emerged because the conditions were never perfect, in the risks that were postponed until they expired, because opportunities do not remain available indefinitely. They move on, often to someone else who was less prepared but more willing to act. The man eventually understood that his life had not been shaped by a single catastrophic mistake, but by a series of reasonable choices that prioritized comfort over growth, predictability over possibility, and approval over ambition. And by the time he recognized this pattern, the window to make the same leap he once avoided had narrowed, not completely closed, but no longer wide open. Because time changes the nature of risk, what was once a bold step becomes a heavy gamble when responsibilities accumulate and energy declines. This is the quiet mathematics of life that few people are taught. Every decision carries a cost, but the most expensive ones are disguised as safety because they trade long-term potential for short-term peace of mind. And peace of mind can become a trap when it prevents you from confronting uncertainty. Somewhere else, another person faced a similar crossroads, but interpreted the same uncertainty differently, seeing not danger but possibility, and chose to move forward despite the lack of guarantees. And their path was far from smooth, filled with doubt, setbacks, and moments of regret. Yet each challenge expanded their capacity. Each mistake became information. Each year built momentum instead of preserving comfort. And over time, the compounding effect of action transformed uncertainty into advantage. The difference between these two lives was not intelligence, talent, or luck. It was tolerance for uncertainty, the willingness to pay the price of discomfort early instead of the price of regret later. Regret is one of the few debts that cannot be refinanced, because it grows heavier with time and lighter with action. Yet action always feels expensive in the present, while inaction feels affordable, even wise, until the long-term cost becomes unavoidable. Every day presents choices that seem small, whether to learn something new or repeat what is already known, whether to speak up or remain silent, whether to invest time in growth or spend it in distraction, and none of these decisions feel life-defining in isolation, but their cumulative effect determines the trajectory of a decade. The illusion of neutrality is dangerous, because not choosing is itself a choice, and avoiding risk does not eliminate cost. It simply shifts it into the future, where it becomes harder to pay. The man who chose safety did not fail in a dramatic sense. He succeeded in building stability, yet stability without growth becomes stagnation, and stagnation carries an invisible emotional toll that cannot be measured in financial terms, a quiet awareness that something was possible but never pursued. In contrast, the one who chose uncertainty endured visible struggle but accumulated invisible strength, adaptability, resilience, perspective, and those qualities created options that did not exist before. Options are the true currency of freedom, and they are purchased through decisions that feel uncomfortable at the time they are made. The cost of any choice is not only what you lose immediately, but what you prevent from ever becoming possible. And this is why the safest path can be the most limiting, because it minimizes short-term loss at the expense of long-term expansion. Most people assume that risk is expensive and safety is cheap, but over time the equation reverses. Risk paid early often reduces future cost, while safety paid early often increases it. The second video you are watching is not about dramatic life turning points, but about the subtle architecture of everyday decisions, the silent exchanges where comfort is traded for possibility, where approval is traded for authenticity, where delay is traded for growth, and where each trade shapes a future that feels inevitable, but was once optional. Understanding this changes how you interpret hesitation, because hesitation is not neutral. It is a signal that a cost is being calculated subconsciously, and when the calculation prioritizes fear over potential, the result is a life that appears stable but feels incomplete. The man eventually realized that the greatest risk was not failure but the absence of meaningful challenge, not instability but the absence of growth. And by the time he attempted to reverse course, he discovered that delayed courage requires greater sacrifice than early courage ever did. This is why the timing of decisions matters as much as their direction, because the same action taken later often demands a higher price than if taken earlier, and the cost difference is paid in energy, time, and opportunity. Life rarely punishes immediately. It waits, allowing patterns to solidify until they feel natural, and by then the alternative seems unrealistic even when it remains possible. The lesson hidden in these quiet trajectories is simple yet unsettling. Every comfortable choice must eventually be justified by a future that makes it worthwhile, and when that future fails to materialize, the comfort reveals itself as costly. Conversely, every uncomfortable choice must eventually produce growth to justify its difficulty, and when it does, the early struggle appears small compared to the later expansion. The real challenge is that this evaluation can only be done in hindsight, which is why awareness in the present becomes so valuable, because it allows you to recognize that today's decision is not isolated, but part of a compounding sequence that shapes who you become. The algorithm of life does not reward intentions, it rewards patterns, and patterns are formed through repetition of seemingly minor choices, each one reinforcing a direction until change becomes harder. The man who stayed safe did not intend to limit himself. He simply repeated a decision that felt reasonable, and reasonableness became routine, and routine became identity. Meanwhile, The one who embraced uncertainty did not intend to become extraordinary. They simply tolerated discomfort long enough for growth to accumulate. The difference was not visible day to day, but over years it became undeniable. This is the true cost of choices, not the immediate sacrifice, but the long-term identity they construct, the self that emerges from repeated trade-offs between comfort and possibility, between certainty and expansion, between approval and authenticity. When viewed from this perspective, every decision becomes less about the moment and more about the trajectory it reinforces, because trajectories determine destinations long before they are reached. And in the end, the most important realization is that no path is free. Every choice demands payment, either now in effort and uncertainty, or later in regret and limitation. And while the timing of payment can be negotiated, the existence of cost cannot be avoided. The only real question is which price you are willing to pay: the discomfort of growth or the quiet weight of unrealized potential, because both will arrive eventually, and only one leads to a future that expands instead of contracts.